if he's able to sign Dylan, who hasn't publicly flipped yet, but if that were to happen next week, can we just talk about like the momentum of the program and just like where that puts Nebraska in terms of attracting other talent, proof of concept to other programs that are in Nebraska's shoes, that they don't just have to end up at Georgia. It doesn't have to be the rich getting richer. Like, I feel like this is a very significant recruiting crossroads, not just for the, one quarterback going somewhere, but for the Nebraska program, and also like what that means for, teams like Nebraska who might just assume they're going to lose out to Georgia or Alabama or one of those teams.
Right. I think you have to look at the big picture, and that the playoff is expanding next year to 12 teams. And that by itself opens up opportunities for all kinds of programs that aren't named Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, or Texas, or, you guys know the list. And, while Nebraska's not in that category at this point that is competitive for even a 12-team college football playoff, it's feasible to think that, with the momentum that it could gain from Dylan Raiola, and we're not even talking about Kyle McCord here, who was another 5-star prospect out of high school and was in Lincoln this week on a visit as a transfer portal prospect, and is a Nebraska lean, I would say, at this point himself, to come in and play 1 year with Dylan as his understudy. So you could go from one former 5-star prospect in Kyle McCord, the Ohio State transfer, to another 5-star prospect in Dylan Raiola at the quarterback position, who would take over then in 2025. And that is monumental for the growth of the program and in the direction that Matt Rhule wants to take it.
Not just momentum.
Not just in what you want to do on the field and in completing passes and throwing touchdowns, and not being the team that threw fewer passes in 2023 than every FBS program, with the exception of Army, Navy, and Air Force. That was Nebraska's situation this last year.
To hear out loud.
Right. To then one that has,
I didn't know that's banana land.
That is right. Absolutely bonkers.
31 turnovers in addition to throwing no passes, 21 passes a game. That's how bad the quarterback, and I don't want to come down too hard on Heinrich Harburg, who won 5 of 6 starts at one point in this season, but he isn't the future for Nebraska. He's not the picture of the offense that Matt Rhule in any way wants to run. And Kyle McCord and Dylan Raiola long-term certainly would fit into that category, and they would help entice players to come in who could help Nebraska run that kind of offense.
You've covered this program for as long as anyone. Just where would this stack up in terms of all-time Nebraska recruiting wins?
Well, because of the nature of the way that this one is played out, and Dylan was offered after his freshman year before he took a varsity snap when he was in Burleson, Texas, and then the ups and downs, it looked optimistic for Nebraska, and then Scott Frost went through this death spiral over the last year or two of his regime with Raiola, there to see the whole thing from the ground level. And then there was hope again when he decommitted from Ohio State right around the time that Matt Rhule took over. In fact, last year at this time, all the way up through maybe late February, early March, it looked like Raiola was going to skip right over this Georgia part and just go ahead and commit to Nebraska. And then the spring happened, and he got more and more embedded with Georgia. And of course, then they moved to Georgia, and it's seemingly over because of all that, Grace, and all of the drama that has existed. And of course, his ranking and who he is and his last name, it's the top. You have to go back. Yeah, the number one most compelling recruiting story that has happened for Nebraska, and certainly you look at Nebraska and its history, and it has signed great players. I mean, a school that won 5 national championships is going to have had many, many great players. Guys who were first-round NFL draft picks, but we're talking about a completely different era of the sport where recruiting didn't always take or never took the stage in the way that it does now. Even in 2005, when Nebraska signed what was considered a top 5 recruiting class in the country, and there were some 5-star and borderline 5-star players in that group. That's the class that produced Ndamukong Suh. If we had known what Ndamukong Suh was going to be, I think he would have been a bigger recruiting win than even what you're looking at with Raiola here. But he was a great player, but people didn't know what he would become. This one's bigger. They've never had a quarterback like this who who has come on board into the program, as ready to be a star in college football as what Dylan Raiola looks to be.
Mitch, I got one last question for you. I'm looking at the rankings right now. I guess this Nebraska class is 22nd, 25 commits. I'm sure it'll probably jump into the teens once you get the 5-star points there for Raiola once he flips, assuming he flips. But I'm curious. I mean, this has to have obviously created a lot of buzz for the recruits that Nebraska's been chasing that maybe weren't going to come to the program. Are there any other targets, even in the 24, 25 class, that you think, because of Raiola potentially flipping, could become, other flips for the Cornhuskers?
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska's pretty much done with this 24 class. I think that there are going to be a couple of names over the last week, and we'll see. Maybe adding a receiver. There's some connections in South Florida that Phil Simpson has that maybe a flip or an undecided player, but nothing on like the 5-star caliber. They are talking, in addition to I mentioned Kyle McCord from Ohio State, talking also to Julian Fleming from Ohio State. And, he's a former 5-star and, somebody who's been with the Buckeyes for the past 3 years and would upgrade Nebraska's receiver group immediately and provide experience that McCord and or Raiola wouldn't be throwing to Fleming as his number one target because he has 1 year left, like McCord. But I think it's more down the road. Nebraska, like a lot of schools right now, at the end of the 2023 calendar year, is in a pretty significant scholarship crunch. You add in the recruits who were committed without Raiola to the returning players, and they're around 100 on the scholarship list. So yeah, players are going to have to go into the portal. There's going to have to be some attrition between now and August when it's got to be at 85. So they don't have room to go out and catch 7 or 8 prospects on the coattails of a Dylan Raiola commitment. And it's happened so late in the process that it's going to be somewhat minimal with the immediate impact. But I think in the 25 class, absolutely, this will be something that makes a big difference. And there are going to be some ramifications of probably a player or two from the 24 group that are still added, and maybe some help also through the portal.
Mitch, my last one, and then we'll let you carry on living your life. But both of us wrote about Daniel Kalin before. Months. It might have even been a year ago now when he committed to Mizzou. The notion was that he committed to Mizzou because that was the place that truly wanted him, and that was something that mattered to him.
Yeah.
And then when Nebraska, had a change in, I believe it was staff, they recruited him, but they didn't recruit him in a way that they weren't honest about where things stood with Dylan. I think that they always knew that if Dylan were to become available, that they would want them. And, with all the different commitments flying around, that was a tough decision. So then when Dylan removed himself from the picture again and committed in May, that gave Kalin a green light to flip from Mizzou back to Nebraska because that was the spot. And now, again, late in the process, 1 week before, as you alluded to, Raiola is back in the picture, and now Kalin, who's been recruiting for this Nebraska class, might be the odd man out here. But can I ask this straight up? Like, would they take him?
Yeah.
If he wanted to still go?
Yeah. His scholarship is good. He can still come. It's just a matter with him of, again, and I think it's a great point you brought up about the reason that he committed to Missouri in the first place last spring. He had a Nebraska offer from back in 2021. It's because that's the place where he felt like he was wanted. And the question that he has to ask himself is how he feels about Nebraska now, if in fact Nebraska is about to does sign Dylan Raiola next week. And it's not as easy of a question to answer because now he's been embedded with Nebraska for so long, for these last 6 or 7 months. And Daniel Kalin is a big part of the reason that Nebraska gathered some 20 commitments in the month of June. That was momentum that he started in May when he committed. 2 of his high school receivers are in this recruiting class. One of his best friends in this recruiting class is Carter Nelson, the tight end from Little Ainsworth, Nebraska, who played 8-man football and was a target of Notre Dame and Georgia and Alabama early in this process, a top 100 player. His recruiting experience, Nelson's recruiting experience, was largely impacted by Daniel Kalin. So that gets pretty complex. And, Matt Rhule did an excellent job of threading the needle through the early part of 2023 to maintain and keep that relationship in a good spot with Kalin, which was hard to do when they were hard after Dylan Raiola and he played the same position. And at that point, they weren't going to take both guys. It's maybe even more difficult now for Rhule to handle this in a perfect way with Kalin, because you're so close to signing day and this Raiola thing is coming back out of nowhere when you've already laid so much groundwork with Daniel Kalin. So this is one of the more interesting subplots in the entire thing, and one of the more interesting storylines to watch next week. I think nationally. I mean, Daniel Kalin is a somebody in recruiting. He was an Elite 11 finalist and is a good quarterback in his own right, but he's not the number 2 quarterback in the country. And these two guys have been on the field together. Danny knows what Dylan is. He encountered him back in Lincoln at a camp in 2021 when the Nebraska coaches were enamored with Raiola and Kalin standing over on the side of the field kind of by himself. So he's always been, at least for the last 2.5 years, he's been in the shadow of Raiola, and it's a tough situation for this home state player to have to deal with now in the days before signing day. If nothing else, he's getting a crash course, and has been for a couple of years, but now it's really in front of him of what life is like and how this it's not fair what's being put in front of him. But this is big business, and college football is more big business now than it ever has been because of NIL. And in the end, Kalin is going to be better for this, but it's tough what he has to go through right now.
Yeah, I feel bad for him, but also too, the one thing that has to be said, and I don't know if this is going to ever have any impact on Dylan Raiola's career, because he's a very talented player. I've seen him in person. He's big, strong, has a live arm. There's a lot of discussion of he's been to 2 or 3 high schools now and has had 2 or 3 commitments. This is a person who has really shown, and I don't know if it's him, his whole family, or whatever, a willingness to change his mind and do it on a whim and make very drastic moves in his life, whether it be where he lives, what high school he attends, or what college he's committed to. I think if I were Daniel Kalin, I still might go to Nebraska and see how things play out. But, and if I were Nebraska, I would take the kid that helped you put your class together and let them compete. And, maybe Dylan Raiola wins and becomes the number 1 overall pick in the draft. That's what, players ranked for where he is are expected to do. But it's a weird dynamic when a person who has changed their mind so frequently has an impact on somebody else. And that's just kind of the way that recruiting works.
I'll finish with this is to kind of respond to that. And you guys know, and if you followed Matt Rhule, you understand the way that he's built programs in college at Temple and at Baylor, and what he's been doing at Nebraska in this first year is to build around this whole one of us mentality. They all wear shirts that say OOU and have hats, and that's their hashtag on social media. And that kind of a mentality it works. It works pretty well when you're not dealing with 5-star egos and big money and the things that come with massive recruiting wins. It's a little more difficult when you start to get into this world that they want to get into with highly talented players. Sometimes, and I'm not saying this is the case with Dylan Raiola, but sometimes you will find that those players are more out for themselves than they are out for the team. And I don't believe that to be the case with Raiola. I've sat down with him and have talked at length with him, and I think he is a team guy. Otherwise, why would he be coming to a school that's coming off of a 5-7 season? But when you get Raiola, or you get McCord, or you get Julian Fleming, you start to wade into some different waters. And that was difficult for Matt Rhule when he was in the NFL. That's where you're dealing with big time talent and big time players on an everyday basis. So it'll be interesting to see how he walks that line in bringing Nebraska along to a place that really Rhule hasn't ever had to deal with much in his years as a college coach.